I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 66 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Agriculture and Agri-Food. I will start with a few reminders. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. Just so you're aware, the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. We have a lot of subbing tonight. First, Ms. Khalid for Mr. Turnbull. Welcome to the committee. Mr. Baines for Ms. Valdez, Mr. Dorothy for Mr. Barlow, Mr. Johns for Mr. McGregor, and Ms. Lanceman for Ms. Rood. So welcome to the committee.
Colleagues, we were just a little bit disrupted by the votes. I don't foresee there being a vote. I don't think that that's possible, or it might not be, but just in case somehow this happens, I'd ask for your unanimous consent that if a vote does come up, that we vote virtually from this room, and that we don't take necessarily 10 or 15 minutes. I, as the chair, will give a reasonable period to vote, but we don't want to disrupt our witnesses who are in the room. So I think that's all agreed upon in the room. Okay, great, perfect. So pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, April 17th, 2023, the committee is resuming its study of animal biosecurity preparedness. And I'd like to now welcome our witnesses who are joining us here tonight. From Animal Health Canada, we have Colleen McElwain, who's the Executive Director. I think maybe perhaps joining us online, so thank you for joining. From the Canadian Pork Council, Renee Roy, who's the Chair, and Audrey Cameron, Director of On-Farm Programs. Welcome, and thank you so much for your patience as we get through some of the procedural elements in the House. Avec les éleveurs de porc du...
With the Éleveurs du Port du Québec, we have Yvan Fréchette, First Vice President, and Raphael Bertinotti, Director, Quality, Health, Research and Development. Welcome to the committee.
And with the Ontario Pork, we have John De Bruin, who's the Chair of the Board of Directors, and Tara Terpstra. Am I getting that right? Terpstra. Tara, good to see you. Nice to meet you this just before we get started. John, of course, Chair of the Board of Directors, and Tara is the Vice Chair of the Board of Directors. So thank you for making the trip in and being here in person. We're going to have 5 minutes for opening remarks, and then we're going to turn it over for questions. Colleagues, we do have some work, so we're going to go about just shy of 2 hours today with our two panels, and then we have just a little bit of work to get done where we've had some delays over the last couple of weeks. I'm going to turn it over to the Canadian Pork Council, Monsieur Roy. Over to you. Allez-y, 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the invitation, and thank you to the members of the committee for your work on this issue. My name is Renée Roy. I am the chair of the Canadian Pork Council. Joining me is Director of On-Farm Programs, Audrey Cameron, and I am also with our Executive Director, Colleen McElwain, is also here as a witness. We're also pleased to be joined by the Éleveurs de Porc du Québec and by Ontario Pork. Throughout the industry, we are seized and concerned with the questions about biosecurity, and we have made great strides at improving preparedness throughout the industry in recent years. And we are also committed to ongoing improvements as we continue to work to keep African swine fever and other diseases out of Canada.
Voice of Canada's almost 8,000 pork farmers. Our industry is responsible for almost $5 billion in annual export to more than 75 markets around the world. Indeed, the pork export represents almost 1% of Canada world export. Let's start about what we would like to see. We'd like to see better tools and testing capabilities for disease surveillance so that we can track outbreaks even quicker and work to eliminate health threats. We would also love to see a cross-government initiative set up related to wild pig eradication. At present, CFIA is leading the initiative, but it's not really a food issue. We intend to work with government to include Natural Resource Canada in the mix, as well as Park Canada, as we seek to eradicate this invasive species. Finally, we continue to seek harmonization of regulation as much as possible with the United States on this issue. Given the integrated nature of our industry on both sides of the border, the more we can collaborate with USDA on biosecurity engagement, the better. So what have our effort to improve biosecurity entailed thus far? And what would we like to see? As an industry, we have done very good work on traceability programs. PigTrace is recognized as the best-in-class traceability program around the world. Its existence has allowed us to respond quickly to outbreaks of Seneca Valley virus, among others, to contain outbreaks quickly and to mitigate their impact on the industry. We have also worked with livestock transporters to ensure our transportation practices maximize biosecurity at every step. Work we have undertaken in collaboration with AFC, CFIA, and others in the industry. We also provide our members with training and on-farm programs to help guide their biosecurity decision, and we work continually to improve those standards. Our international trading partners recognize us as a leader in this area, and we continue to work to maintain that position globally. Thanks to the government funding for ASF preparation, we continue to work to develop tools and toolkits for farmers to use on farm to ensure they have the best available knowledge about prevention tools and other best practices. Thank you, and we'll be ready to take your questions.
Thank you very much. We'll now turn to les éleveurs de Port du Québec, Monsieur Franchet.
Now on to les éleveurs de Port du Québec, Mr. Frechette or Mr. Bertinotti. 5 minutes. Your microphone seems to be muted. Indeed, that's better. Hello, everyone. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to testify today. First, I'll start with a portrait of the importance of biosecurity in the Quebec pork sector and finish with a summary analysis of strengths and weaknesses. Biosecurity is a set of measures designed to reduce disease transmission. Biosecurity is really the foundation of our business. Canada enjoys an enviable health situation worldwide, and it is this privileged position that has enabled us to become one of the world's leading exporters. 70% of our pork production is exported. Moreover, countries such as Spain and Brazil have become major competitors thanks to the improved health situation in their territories. We face different types of health threats. Basically, there are 3 main categories of disease. Notifiable diseases such as foot and mouth disease and African swine fever, emerging diseases such as swine epidemic diarrhea, and endemic diseases such as PRRS and influenza. Each disease has its own characteristics, and therefore it is its own framework and biosecurity measures. Biosecurity can be thought through at the level of Canada, the region, the hog enterprise, or the pork industry, and or the breeding site. In Quebec, improving the health of our herds is at the heart of our industry's strategic plan. We have set up a provincial organization to discuss health issues. In particular, it is working on an African swine fever emergency plan, which is well advanced. There are also several organizations working to maintain and improve swine health in Quebec. Here are our strengths with regards to biosecurity. Canada's favorable geographic location is definitely a strength. The absence of feral pigs in Quebec, which is not the case in the rest of Canada, but we don't have any in Quebec. Our business ecosystem dedicated to health issues or our disease surveillance capabilities, even if funding is sometimes lacking. Our research and vaccine production capabilities are another strength. We will be rolling out an influenza vaccine based on swine strains circulating in Quebec soon. Our level of biosafety compliance has improved significantly. We've deployed over 1,100 biosafety audits at our sites since 2017 and several dozen with our transport companies. Our success in systematically eradicating all swine epidemic diarrhea contaminations is also a strength. Here are our weaknesses. At the Canadian level, we must reduce the cost of licensing drugs and vaccines in Canada. We must do more in terms of border control to prevent the introduction of African swine flu into Canada. As a reminder, despite our efforts, 2 major diseases have entered Canada from Asia in the last decade, notably swine epidemic diarrhea. The relevance of classifying ASF as a notifiable disease is also questionable. To put it into context, a case of ASF in any swine or hog in Canada, including pet pigs, will turn my area into a field of ruins, and the result would be the humane slaughter of half of Canada's farmed pigs. Pigs that are healthy, but that will no longer have a market because we will no longer be able to export them. So you have to understand that the rules surrounding the diseases will have more consequences than the disease itself, which is not acceptable. To limit this human and economic disaster, we need functional zoning trade agreements to recover our ability to export in a matter of days. This is not the case at present. The USA has too long of a delay, and it's subjected to a possible political decision and non-tariff barrier with the EU. We also need to sign compartmentalization agreements, and we need funding to put them in place. Provincially, and even at the Canadian level, transport remains a weak link, despite all the efforts made in the past. We need more washing and drying stations across the country. Regionally, the distance between our sites is not always ideal in the face of certain aerosol diseases such as PRRS or influenza, and we need to reduce the cost of installing filtration systems. At company levels, we need to work on compliance with biosafety protocols, and we continue to make considerable efforts to improve this. The digitization of our industry will be a fantastic lever to make progress. Thank you very much. We are ready for your questions. Thank you, Mr. Bertinotti. Now, on to the Ontario Pork Association.
Good evening. As mentioned, my name is John DeBrun, Chair of Ontario Pork, and I'll be sharing my time with Tara Terpstra, the Vice Chair. We're pleased to present to this committee the ongoing activities and investments to improve biosecurity preparedness to prevent the threat of foreign animal diseases, in particular African swine fever, to the Canadian swine industry, as well as many other hazards to animals and human health. Biosecurity is critical to reduce the spread of swine diseases across the industry. There are many diseases that, if they enter a barn, will have devastating impacts on the farm as well as the industry. As part of our presentation, we would like to share our perspectives from the Ontario pork sector. Ontario pork sector represents a significant share of Canada's agriculture and food sector. We're currently just under 1,000 producers in Ontario who market just shy of 6 million hogs. Ontario's pork producers are among the world's leaders in animal care, food safety, quality, and traceability. As an industry that exports roughly 2/3 of our domestic production, international markets access is a cornerstone of economic success. Any foreign animal disease entering Canada would have a severe and negative impact on the pork sector as well as our economy. An ASF outbreak in Canada would result in an immediate border closure to both live animals as well as pork products. And we do welcome government support to help us prevent as well as prepare for foreign animal disease outbreaks. Many swine diseases, if they enter a barn, will have devastating impacts on the farm as well as the industry. Depending on the disease, the stage of production, and the size of the barn, an outbreak could have a significant impact on my farm. A great deal of effort and investment was put into biosecurity on farms and continues to be invested over the years here. Due to diverse production systems and marketing arrangements, there is significant animal movement between different locations within the swine sector. Makes us a bit unique as an industry across Canada. Some critical control points within the supply chain still require further attention and investment to bridge the gaps. These critical control points from Ontario's perspective are assembly yards, livestock trucks, as well as processing plants. Currently considered by producers as having increased risk of exposing animals and vehicles to disease-causing agents. Since these areas are considered central hubs of animal movement, they require a more sizable investment in biosecurity measures to be effective.
We strongly support the creation and maintenance of the Canadian Foot and Mouth Disease Vaccine Bank. We ask the government and government agencies to remain vigilant with respect to foreign animal disease prevention and preparedness, which includes the Canadian Border Service Agency to enhance preventative measures as surveillance, awareness, and education to all entry points in Canada. The CFIA to improve efficiency of screening of imported feed ingredients and rapid testing protocols and procedures to resolve suspected cases found on our farms. AAFC to create a framework to further investment into biosecurity enhancements and research to be utilized throughout the value chain. The Ontario swine industry has a proven record of continuous improvement and investment in biosecurity measures over the years at the farm level. Biosecurity in the swine industry continues to evolve as new methods are adopted. Strategic investment in new research infrastructure is key to developing improved practices and solutions with respect to emerging animal health challenges, development of new vaccines, as well as biosecurity measures that could be applied across the value chain. When it comes to on-farm biosecurity, putting preventative measures in place to keep animals healthy has been a long-standing and successful practice for Ontario hog farms. Any new regulations or programs related to biosecurity need to be flexible in design to allow producers to adapt to their farming operations without compromising biosecurity, effectiveness, and industry competitiveness. If the past few years haven't taught us anything, it is that we cannot afford to be complacent and we need to stay vigilant. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We'll now turn to questions. Mr. Steinley, over to you Monsieur Liu, pour 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Liu, for 6 minutes. Go ahead. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here tonight. Once again, we apologize for the delay. Quick question. You've all mentioned the importance of being well prepared in facing the African swine fever. We know it's very present. I'll start with Mr. Roy and move on to others. Are we well prepared to deal with African swine fever? It's an important question. We have worked very hard as an industry and with the government in order to improve the situation. Here's where we have some work left to do. The programs in order to help if there's a crisis. I will ask Ms. Cameron to give us more details on the programs and what is left to do. Indeed, there are many tools that we are working on daily. But one of the first tools we would like to promote most is traceability. We have a traceability tool right now. We have a program in place called PigTrace. It is very well implemented, but it gives us a 7-day perspective. We'd like digital tools in order for us to get the data back quickly, almost instantly, live. That would require a huge investment in order to develop these digital tools. You've also spoken about the importance of border control. As the Canadian Border Security Agency, do they have the proper tools to do the proper tracing at the moment that the goods are accepted into Canada? They have made significant investments. The borders are quite fluid, however. We need to make more efforts. When there are crises coming in from elsewhere, for example, from the Caribbean, well, we need more resources in order for us to better monitor the situation. In that case, should we be investing more in the border security? Do we have a shortage of veterinarians? We are often told that that's the case. Do you agree? Yes. Indeed, we need more resources and more for monitoring and surveilling. The dogs, for example, that sniff out the illnesses in the meat. That's very important. If we were to talk about research, would the federal government be able to help and be more at the vanguard of these tools? Sometimes these diseases develop very quickly in other areas. Are we putting enough into research? Yes, with regards to vaccines, there are a lot of efforts that are deployed. We talk about a lot of swine fevers and swine flus, but other diseases are also putting our country at risk. Developing a vaccine, especially when we collaborate with other countries, gives us an advantage with regards to controlling the illness. Swine fever isn't, vaccines are not recognized yet, but there is some hope. With regards to certification, once they are certified and they've been developed elsewhere, can there be some sort of exchange with various countries, whether it be the EU or the United States, that would help us to not waste time to do our own research? Mr. Bertinotti had spoken about this earlier. What I'll say briefly is that there is an effort to be made with regards to our laws. It costs a lot of money to have new vaccines, and that is a major obstacle to Canadian biosecurity, especially when we are looking to diminish the amount of products we are using, especially class 1, that are used in human health. I'll let others respond. Yes, I do still have some time left. With the pork producers in Quebec, have you anything to add? René answered very well. That is pretty much what we wanted to tell you about certification. What we experienced with COVID was that there was some sort of fast tracking in order to certify products that were recognized in foreign countries, which doesn't exist in Canada. We would need to properly authorize these vaccines. The pork industry in Canada is a lot smaller than elsewhere, so some companies don't want to invest the millions of dollars that are necessary to do so. Thank you very much. Mr. Drouin for 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to my colleagues and who are witnesses, and I call them my colleagues because I've had the opportunity to work with them in the past. I'll start with Mr. Roy. You mentioned that there is some work that needs to be done. I know that a few years ago, we talked about it in committee. That was more than 5 years ago. There was no plan at the time, but things seem to have moved. Of course, we should always, or we can always be better prepared. With regards to the border, I heard our colleague from Ontario mention that we have to double check how the animals are fed. There's always an exchange to be made. We don't know if we should be putting, we don't know if we should implement more processes implemented, or if we should just let free trade do its thing. Are you aware of any available technologies that would not be an obstacle to the free trade between the United States and Canada? We don't have to have we don't have to catch everything at the border when we have a penalty system that is efficient at the border. That allows us to stop a lot more of what we're able to catch. That's one of the tools that we have at our disposition. We also have to promote this penalty system. When tourists or people entering the country are aware of it, that does diminish the pressure of the illness or disease on our country. Here's something we've improved. The collaboration between the industry and the government, both provincially and federally. If you're interested, Mr. Drouin, we can discuss more about animal health. With regards to ASF, there has been a lot of preparation. The inspection agency, for example, if something happens on the farm, producers will deal with the inspection agency. Is that correct? Yes. And often we talk about hogs, but it might not be just on the pork that we are breeding, but also on the population or the wild pigs or out in the wild. Who is responsible for that if something happens there? Sometimes we're doing some work on what's going on in farms, but then there might be something going on elsewhere, and that might be under its different jurisdiction. What do you make of that? There are still some efforts to make. I would ask Ms. McElwain to explain the collaborative work that has been undertaken for the past few years with regards to that.
When it comes to wild pigs, we have a strategy. It's a 10-year strategy, and it has recently been accepted as a final draft. And we say draft because there is an Indigenous engagement component that we need to undertake as well. And the reason why we came up with this strategy was to create a wild pig leadership group, and this would be a multi-partner wild pig group to provide guidance on the regional activities, because certainly when you think about wild pigs, it becomes an environmental consideration. So there are lots of partners working together from the provincial pork organizations, the provincial and provincial government level as well. We also work with the Canadian Wildlife Health Cooperative and the Canadian Council for Invasive Species as a part of this work, and they help us as we're building those relationships, because certainly Animal Health Canada comes from a bit more of an ag background. So we're leveraging those different relationships to begin to look at how do we eradicate, how do we correctly determine the distribution of wild pigs, because if they are found in wildlife, it is still a foreign animal disease. CFIA would have some component of the response for that, but when it comes to containing and then all of the other activities that go with ASF, if it were to be found in Canada, wild pig or commercial pig, there would be very large trade ramifications, as my colleagues have mentioned. So it's definitely a collaborative effort, and it'll take a while to fully get information on exactly where all the wild pigs are in the provinces where we know we have them. So we know some do not, as well as looking at mapping activities, sharing of more information, and then really moving forward on best practices for eradication over the next 10 years.
And just from your experience, so dealing, obviously, we're talking about ASF, but other diseases that have come to Canada, the role that you're now playing and that you had played before, do you find that there's you're creating those links in between those organizations or government bodies that may not have necessarily had the use to talking to one another?
Yes, I would definitely say the multi-partner approach that Animal Health Canada takes, working with federal, provincial, territorial governments, as well as industry partners, is something that does take a different approach, because it allows each partner to bring its plans, its concerns forward for discussion in a collaborative way. So it helps to break down silos. It also helps to identify areas of duplication, gaps, and areas where there might be some more synergy that can happen. So certainly the model itself does lend itself to this kind of a scenario. If we were to have a disease other than, so we focus a lot on African swine fever, but other diseases could potentially present just as big of a risk. So something like foot and mouth disease. And then there's also endemic diseases that are also out in the wildlife populations. There's
Thank you very much.
Other parasites too.
Thank you, Ms. Wayne. I was trying to let you finish, but I do want to be mindful of time. Thank you, Mr. Drouin. Monsieur Parent, 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Perron, 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses who are available and here today. Mr. Roy, you spoke about the importance of funding the preventative measures. Ms. Cameron, you talked about a traceability process, but it's a 7-day delay, and it requires a lot of funding. If you had a recommendation to make to the government on that note, what would it be? Maybe it's difficult for you to specify amounts, but what about the length of the funding so that we could have something coherent on the long term? Indeed, having a system that works long term will allow the industry to structure itself in a better way and face crises in a better way. Right now, there's a 5-year cycle within which these initiatives receive the funds. That means that after 5 years, we don't know if we will get funding for another 5 years. With regards to surveillance, we can't have a 5-year limit. We need a long-term perspective. That kind of effort helps not only the industry, but the entire population. We need funding from the government in order to make sure that this process works long-term. I don't know if you'd like to add something, Ms. Cameron. All I'd like to say is that with regards to the tools, we talked about traceability and surveillance. This is a toolbox that we are trying to build up. We're trying to develop a lot more tools, but we really do need support in order to develop them. I know that Rafael spoke about certain things earlier that would be relevant. That's all I can add. I could talk about it for a very long time. Unfortunately, we don't have all that much time, but take the time you need if you want it. Those investments, would you be able to manage that as an industry? How do you see that happening? Decentralization? How's it working right now over the 5 years? Who is managing that money? Do you think that it is realistic with different government changes to do that? Do you think that we need to maybe implement something that is kind of comes out of this or removes itself from the political cycle? Indeed, that would also allow the industry to have better, to predict things better. We're not asking our members for funds for just a few months, so it would be a lot easier for us to say we have a partnership with the government. Often we also have a coalition. Processors help us with certain initiatives. If we understand that the terms will be allotted to us over the long term, we will be able to rally people and get more funding from the industry. That's a lot clearer. Thank you. Mr. Bertinotti, you said something that piqued my interest. You said that there are rules around diseases that wreak havoc more so than the diseases itself. Can you explain what you meant by that and recommend something? Well, when there are diseases that we must declare in a mandatory way, then we have to close borders. We're in a situation that is quite unusual globally. Having declared the disease within a certain category, we do that because of the impact that it can have. The fact that we have to declare it and that it is mandatory amplifies the economic and social impact on our country. And we are a country that does a lot of exports. So with regards to recommendations, here is what I can suggest. First, how can we improve things? We have certain considerations that are similar to Europeans. In Denmark, for example, they don't necessarily kill all of their animals when there is a disease. They can continue to export to other European countries once they have contained the disease. We also have a free trade agreement with the United States and Mexico, and so that would help us. So that would be the first way of helping the situation. Secondly, we could change the categorization of ASF, but I think that might be a little bit difficult to negotiate internationally. Thank you, Mr. Perron. Mr. Bertinanti, time is up. Mr. Johns, for 6 minutes, please.
First, it's great to be able to join such an esteemed committee. I think you've gotten like over half dozen reports done. And I come from Ogo, where we haven't got a single study complete in 2 years. So it's really good to be at a functioning committee. Now, I'm subbing for my good friend Alistair McGregor, who's trapped at an airport trying to make his way to Ottawa, 24 hours so far in his journey. This is what it's like as Vancouver Island MPs, which I am one of. It can be quite difficult to get here, but it's an honor to be able to be here. And this is such an interesting study, and I want to thank all the witnesses for participating. And maybe I'll start with, there was an animal justice report that mentions, I guess, a large number of biosecurity breaches that have occurred as a result of authorized personnel on farms. All it takes, I guess, is for one farm to make a mistake, and then we can get contamination to other farms. And I'm just going to read a quote from our critic, Mr. McGregor, in second reading of speech on C-275. He cites that, quote, "There is an animal justice report from 2021 that lists hundreds of incidents of failures of biosecurity that were all by authorized personnel associated with the afflicted farms." He says, he repeats it again, he says, "I will repeat that. All of those incidents came from people who were on the property with lawful authority and excuse." And I want to quote from that report. He cites, "Despite the risk to farms, animals, and the economy posed by disease outbreaks, biosecurity on farms is not comprehensively regulated at the federal level. The CFIA publishes voluntary biosecurity guidelines for some animal farming sectors developed in cooperation with industry and government. Adherence to these standards is not a legal requirement. Provincial legislation varies and tends to empower officials to respond to existing biosecurity hazards instead of prescribing rules that farmers must follow to prevent disease outbreaks," end quote. So I guess my question, maybe I'll start with Mr. Roy and Ms. Cameron. In 2019, Canada has exported over 1.2 million tons of pork and pork products valued at $4.2 billion in 94 countries. Now, do farms need stronger regulation? Are the voluntary regulations enough when a multi-billion-dollar industry is potentially at risk? And maybe you can speak to, should there be a legal requirement?
Our industry do not have interest to have outbreaks. So there is no interest for, let's say, authorized personnel who enter and create some disease outbreak is people that are doing their best to make sure that these animals are healthy. So regulations on something that everybody wish is not would not help the situation. If you put a fine to somebody who is doing its best to keep everybody safe, wouldn't help the situation. There are tools that could be useful. For example, better understanding where these disease comes from through research and also promotion of best management practices will be useful. But additional regulation would be of, I would say, not a lot of efficiency in these circumstances.
Mr. Brunner or Ms. Terpstra, do you have anything to add to Mr. Roy's comments, feedback?
Great question. I think the first comment would be that biosecurity is not an on and off thing. It's a standard that just keeps increasing. So, the way I operate my farm today is way different than when I started. And so we always make improvements to biosecurity, and there is a lot of room for research in that area. There's new technologies being developed in other areas, other fields of study that I think our industry could maybe latch on to improve our biosecurity. And the other thing I'd say about it's a state of mind. If you're a farmer, biosecurity is a bit of a state of mind, and there's these invisible lines in my barn that I just don't cross without changing my boots and coveralls. Right? It's all of those things. So.
Did you want anything, Ms. Terpstra?
No, and I think just to remember too, we're all family farms.
Sure.
So I mean, our children also follow biosecurity, so they're even trained at a young age on where they're to go and not to go. But yeah, to be flexible, because my operation is very different from even my next door neighbors or John's here. So yeah, no, thank you.
On May 16th, 2019, Mr. McGregor had an exchange with you, Mr. Roy, from the Canada Pork Council, and regarding the spread of wild boar across Canada over the past 30 years. Mr. Roy, you were saying that African swine fever in pork livestock versus wild boar populations isn't that much different, and that there is definitely a threat to livestock when wild boar populations come prowling out of the forest. Can you talk about what risks do these animals pose to farmed pork, and also have you noticed an influx in wild populations posing a threat to your farmed pork over the past 4 years since that exchange with Mr. McGregor? And you talked about the relationships with the government within our Natural Resources Canada and Parks. Can you elaborate a bit more about that?
In unfortunately about 20 seconds, Mr. Johns will have another crack at it again.
So there is a threat because the wild pig population can become a pool of the disease if the disease enters into the wild pig population, and if we don't take care of it, it will grow. The wild pig population will grow.
That's great. Thank you, Mr. Johns. Thank you, Mr. Roy. We'll go to Mr. Steinley. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I'll do some rapid-fire questions. And this is for Animal Health Canada. How would the Ontario Swine Research Barn support animal biodiversity preparedness?
How would the swine research barn?
Yeah, what would be kind of some of the outcomes that you'd expect to see from the swine research barn?
For biosecurity, that what they could do and what has happened in some other research projects too, is they can do things like swabbing of materials that come in and out of the barn, and actually they can put tracers and map where a potential fake pathogen might have moved through a barn. So that might be one way that a research barn or facility could be used to help do research on biosecurity. Some of the research that's been done, actually not necessarily in Ontario, but in Quebec, actually, they went on farm and they actually assessed in the poultry industry practices with the farmers to understand what they thought they were doing and how it was actually working. And they used video cameras, and they came back with the producers, and they talked to them about what worked and didn't work and where they failed, because it also helps with best practice adoption and awareness building to build those knowledge transfer tools based on the research. So it's about that taking of research and putting it into common everyday practice to support.
No, thank you. I just had a few minutes, so I got a couple more questions, and I'm going to piggyback off of Mr. Johns here and talk about wild boar. In Saskatchewan, wild boar is a fairly substantive issue. It's actually, I was just doing some reading around the city of Melfort, the 90-kilometer circle. There's more wild boar there than all of the rest of Canada. So my question would be around someone from the Pork Council. But do you have an idea of how much interbreeding is going on between domestic hogs and wild boar, and what that new species is? That going to be a new species, a new invasive species?
What we could say, and yes, we heard that there are some inbreeding. We are not experts about wild pigs, and we don't have the detail of the location of all these sounders. What we know is that we have to eradicate an invasive species before it gets worse and get out of control.
So have you had conversations with the minister in regards to some of the wild boar issue? I know the government of Saskatchewan has now put in an extra $200,000 to help with this problem in the 2022 budget, and it's only getting bigger, I think, in my home province. So have you had conversations with the minister and actually relayed how serious of a problem this is in specific areas in the country?
The provinces are also involved in the effort for eradication, so it's done at both levels. Yes, we have made requests to find solutions but there is a lot also of collaboration that has to happen because of this interprovincial and also between the two jurisdictions. So yes, there are work that is done mainly at the provincial level, but collaboration has happened at the country level.
And with Animal Health Canada, have we had any more conversations with the minister about a vaccine bank and where those conversations are at? And is there any provincial cooperation with a vaccine bank coming to fruition here in the near future?
Just to clarify, are you talking about foot and mouth disease or African swine fever?
Foot and mouth disease, sorry.
Yeah, no problem. So at this stage, the development of the vaccine bank is really being led by CFIA. Animal Health Canada's role will be on the implementation. So basically, once we have that bank, how do we get it to the animals should we need it? What's the process? What's the decision making, and how does that work? Because it would be a very multi-stakeholder and resource-heavy activity to do. When it comes to that FPT or federal provincial territorial conversation, my understanding is that that is sitting with the regulatory assistant deputy ministers. So unfortunately, I'm not a part of those conversations.
Did they give you any timelines? Obviously, you said you're going to do help with the rollout if the vaccine bank does come to fruition. So have they given you any timelines when that might be a possibility?
Not specifically. I know it is a high priority for them and they are actively working on it now. And actually, my next step is to meet with CFIA actually in the very near term. I have a meeting scheduled with our chief veterinary officer to basically get a sense of those timelines and where Animal Health Canada can take the work it's already doing on the implementation and make sure that it still remains complementary on both sides.
Thank you very much to you both. We'll now go to Mr. Lewis, up to 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I want to thank all of the witnesses for being here and displaying the importance of the sector to our economy, including the importance to my riding in Kitchener-Conestoga, which I've mentioned before is home to Conestoga Meats, one of the largest pork producers in Ontario. We heard in opening statements, and we've heard from other witnesses, and I believe we can all agree that producers, feed manufacturers, researchers, processors, governments at all levels all need to work together to ensure the safety of pork products and at the same time promoting those positive and animal welfare outcomes. So I could start by directing my questions to the Canadian Pork Council, Monsieur Roy and Madame Cameron. You touched on the Canadian Pork Excellence Platform, which has 3 components. You mentioned traceability as the components. There's also the food safety and biosecurity component of Canadian Pork Excellence, and the pig care, the animal care component. I wondered if you could expand on those 2, as well as if there's anything you wanted to add about traceability.
Sorry. So yeah, the Canadian Pork Excellence Platform, as you said, include the traceability, pig trace, pig safe, food safety, and animal care, which is the pig care program. Those programs, I mean, include biosecurity, but I just would like to mention an additional program that we've been working on, which is a Canadian Swine Biosecurity Best Practices, which is a standard for biosecurity, and multiple tools have to be developed as well as part of this program. I could also join into this compartmentalization. So compartmentalization is an additional tool. This is a little more complex, but we have zoning that is led by CFIA, and then we want industry need compartmentalization as well. If I can come back on traceability, which would be with biosecurity, there are 2 most important tools. for ASF under the Canadian Pork Excellence Platform.
That would be great. Thank you. In the interest of thoroughness, if it's possible, you could table the report or share that with the committee that we could use for our report. That would be very helpful. I wanted to touch base also while we're talking about it, technology, which is good for the welfare of animals, will ensure our food safety and also increase our competitiveness in world markets. In my region, there's a company called PMP Optica, which does automated solutions for food safety and quality inspection at the same time. They're working to find low density contaminants, and they can measure meat quality at the same time without compromising the detection. So what kind of technology and improvements can we adopt? How is that data shared? And what can we do to share those best practices?
Okay, the question is directed to me. Well, in terms of we have a specialist. I would propose that Mr. Bertinotti provides some example of technologies that we have available, or if Mr. Freistedt wants to say a couple of words, because he's a specialist in this field.
Okay.
Oui, je peux commencer pour répondre.
Yes, I can answer. What we would need is the following. The Canadian agency, for us to be able to export 70% of our pork, which is of recognized quality, we need to fill in documents. They are called annexes, and they state that the hogs have not received any contaminants. We would like these documents and these papers to be replaced with apps on our iPads and so on for truckers. That paper has to follow the pork from one farm to another to the slaughterhouse. So right now, that's paper, and that's in paper format, and it's creating confusion. Sometimes some transporters might be sick at the last minute, for example. They are in a certain order, and as Ms. Cameron explained earlier, along with traceability, we need a team that can work on an app with external consultants in order to avoid mistakes. And it's a little bit like an electronic signature when you receive a parcel at home.
Go to Monsieur Parent, 2 minutes 30 secondes, s'il vous plaît.
2 minutes, Mr. Perron. 2.5 minutes. Inaudible for the interpreter. That was the example that I was giving. That was the end of it. So when a package is delivered to your house, you sign electronically. With regards to vaccines, many of you spoke about how important it is to have certification internationally. How is that going right now? Do you have a specific recommendation to make? You spoke of vaccines being developed during COVID. I don't remember who mentioned that earlier. I mentioned that. What we need is, as I said earlier, a fast-tracked system to get vaccines that exist elsewhere, but also develop vaccines according to the stem cells that we have here in our country. You can be sick from a disease in Quebec, and it's the same disease in British Columbia, but doesn't have the same basis, for example. It is very, very complicated. I know that we have to do something that is very hygienic. We need to develop a project, and we were able to do that, but it was very difficult with the agency because they have some very strict rules to follow. Mr. Bertinotti can elaborate on that. Indeed, we have an influenza project to develop an influenza vaccine, and the laws didn't allow us to use specific new technologies. The vaccines you mentioned have RNA, and the laws complicate their use. The other thing that is complicating things right now is a bacteria that came in from Asia, and we need to develop a vaccine against it, but nobody is interested in selling it because there isn't enough volume. With the agency, just the study to put it, to sell it, and an automatic, an emergency crisis authorization costs millions of dollars. It would be very important to have such a vaccine bank in case there is a crisis. Mr. Johns, for 2 minutes and a half.
Mr. Raw, we were just finishing the last round there. We talked about the threat of wild populations to farm pork. And you talked about earlier about your relationship with Natural Resources Canada and as well with Parks Canada. Can you elaborate a bit more about what's going on in terms of that conversation and give us kind of an update?
Yes. Just before, I would like to highlight the fact that if the disease enters into the wild pig population, it becomes really, really hard to eradicate the disease. So we become a pool of the disease, and this is why we have to make sure that we eradicate the invasive species before the disease enters in any ways. It would be so detrimental. First. Second, in terms of our relationship, because these invasive species are everywhere, it goes in various jurisdictions, Parks Canada, also at the provincial level, our indigenous communities. So it's important that everybody are working together. And so far, it has been treated as a threat for health of animals. But in fact, wild pigs are invasive species, and we need the government to take the leadership on this and treat it as an invasive species.
You cited that it's been improving. What more needs to be done? How far is the government going to where it needs to get to?
There are really good work done, for example, in Ontario, where they have almost eradicated the wild pig population. Now we have pockets, especially in the West, where it's really important that everybody are working, and what we would need is to have not only the status, it's recognized that wild pigs are an invasive species, but it has to be treated as an invasive species. Right now, we don't have the government doesn't have the leadership to take it as an invasive species, put the resources, and treat it.
That pretty much puts us at time. Thank you, Mr. Johns. Look, on behalf of the committee, let me thank all our witnesses for taking the time this evening. I apologize for the little bit of a delay, but thank you for joining us, for those who were able to be here in person, and indeed those who were tuning in and participating virtually. Thank you so much for your collective work in agriculture and for helping to inform our really important study. So colleagues, that ends round number one. We're going to just take a very brief pause. We're going to get right back in it because we have to get round two and just a little bit of work done shortly thereafter. So please don't go far. Thank you. We'll suspend. Welcome to the second panel of our study on biosecurity, animal biosecurity preparedness, I should say. We have three more great witnesses lined up, and first of all, with the Canadian Cattle Association, here in the room, Matt Bowman, who is the co-chair of Animal Health and Care Committee. Mr. Bowman, thank you for making the time and being here. And online, we have Dr. Lee Rosengren, who is the Chief Veterinary Officer. So thank you for joining us. I heard earlier, I think you're from Saskatchewan. You were talking about getting cattle out into the field. So I look forward to maybe hearing some of your testimony tonight. From the Canadian Veterinary Medical Association, we have Dr. Trevor Lawson, who is the incoming president. Mr. Lawson's a Nova Scotian, indeed works at a veterinary firm in my riding of King's Hand. So good to see a fellow Blue Noser, Mr. Lawson. And finally, avec les Unions de Prédateurs d'Agricole, Paul Doyon.
Paul Doyon, first General Vice President. And Guylain Charon, Agricultural Research and Policy Advisor.
Opening remarks, I'm going to start with the Canadian Cattle Association. Over to you, Mr. Bowman, or to Ms. Rosengren.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair and honourable members. Great to be here tonight. My name is Matt Bowman, and I appreciate the opportunity to come today to represent the Canadian Cattle Association and our 60,000 beef producers across the country. I am the co-chair of the Animal Health and Care Committee, along with Mr. Miles Woke from Alberta, and I'm also joined today virtually by Dr. Lee Rosengren, our Chief Veterinary Officer. So let me start by emphasizing the animal health and care is central to our daily work as cattle producers. Our sustainability depends on the health of our herd. We have world-class high standards presently in place and are striving for continual improvement. Ensuring animal health means protecting animals from day-to-day diseases while preparing for emergencies, disasters, and foreign animal diseases. Given the study before the committee, my remarks will focus on the activities and the priorities of the beef industry targeted at improving preparedness for the foot and mouth disease. And there are three reasons for this. First of all, FMD is among the most contagious viruses for cattle in the world. Secondly, FMD affects all cloven hoof species. And so we work closely with our other commodity partners to ensure that our preparedness can be as effective as possible. And finally, FMD is present in 70% of the world's livestock, so an incursion is a real threat to Canadian production. Any detection of FMD would result in complete and full border closure until all international closure to all international trade of live animals and meat products, until Canada could eliminate the disease and regain its FMD-free status. The beef sector has invested heavily in FMD preparedness, including surveillance, traceability, and biosecurity. With respect to traceability, the beef sector identifies all cattle with an individual animal ID number. This allows lifetime traceability of the animals throughout their life in Canada. CFIA currently has an open consultation on its traceability regulations, and CCA is actively preparing our comments for those regulations. Biosecurity includes all practices that prevent or mitigate disease from entering, spreading within, or being released from a farm or ranch. As FMD is a reportable disease, the activities of the Canadian Border Services Agency and our import permit procedures are critical in ensuring that FMD does not enter Canada from other countries. Farm and ranch level biosecurity looks different in the beef industry than in other livestock sectors. Other commodities have indoor production that provides the opportunity for layers of biosecurity at the farm gate or at the barn door. Cattle operations many have neither of these, so our processes look much different. However, we have a robust system that is delivered through the Verified Beef Production Plus program. VBP Plus is a voluntary industry and producer-led initiative to proactively mitigate risk through producer training and certification. Training encompasses producer preparedness and documentation requirements to validate implementation. The third-party certification verifies practices in place and confirms documentation completion. In addition, the Beef Cattle Research Council is central to ensuring recommended best practices are science-based and clearly communicated to the industry. These initiatives cost the beef industry stakeholders over $12.4 million to achieve. Our sector has estimated that an additional $15.9 million in initial investment and an ongoing $2.3 million in an ongoing cost associated with the pending traceability recommendations. The beef sector's ongoing investment to prevent disease incursion and spread demonstrates our commitment to the emergency preparedness. It provides an excellent basis for the government to leverage investment in foreign animal disease prevention and response. We all have a role to play in biosecurity, and I must point out to the unintended consequences of CFIA's transport regulations that came into effect in 2022. We are concerned that they are creating more of a biosecurity risk, and I will be more than happy to elaborate more on this in the Q&A session. Given the importance of today's discussion, I must close by thanking the government for its investment in the Budget 23 for the FMD Vaccine Bank. This is a critical component of our preparedness plan, and we are anxious to see it established with robust plans for its deployment if necessary. We look forward to continuing to work with federal and provincial governments along with other industries, including Animal Health Canada, on our various roles and responsibilities to adequately prepare for a foreign disease outbreak. We recognize the link between animal health, human health, and mental health, and are taking a one health, one welfare approach to biosecurity. This is evergreen work for our sector as we continually develop and improve our repertoire of risk management and preventative practices that improve a foundation for healthy herds, healthy producers, and healthy balance sheets. We look forward to more discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bowman. We'll now turn to Mr. Lawson for up to 5 minutes, please.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for the invitation to join you here this evening. My name is Dr. Trevor Lawson. I'm a large animal practicing veterinarian in Nova Scotia and the president-elect of the Canadian Veterinary Medical Association. As an organization that represents the national and international voices of Canada's veterinarians, the CVMA represents over 25,000 veterinarians and registered veterinary technicians throughout the country. The CVMA advocates on behalf of the profession with our strategic priorities including animal welfare, national issues, and balanced and supported lives and careers of veterinarians. As a national organization, the CVMA is comprised of elected delegates from all provinces, veterinary colleges, students, and registered veterinary technologists, and speaks as a national voice for veterinarians through the means of our science-informed position statements developed by our largely volunteer committees and the tools and resources we develop to help support and sustain our core competencies. One of the key areas the CVMA remains focused on is antimicrobial use in animals. The CVMA takes seriously the risk of antimicrobial resistance and has been advocating for prudent antimicrobial use and stewardship in animals for over 30 years. Further to this effort, we developed with guidance from an array of stakeholder groups, SAVI, or the Stewardship of Antimicrobials by Veterinarians Initiative. SAVI is a 4-year project funded by Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, which concluded in March of this year. This project has engaged Canadian veterinary experts in developing CVMA veterinary antimicrobial use guidelines to support informed decision-making by veterinarians on prudent antimicrobial use in 8 species of groups of animals. SAVI has also supported the development of a prototype for electronic prescription data collection and as a reporting system involving selected food animal practices in Canada. In November of 2021, in partnership with experts from the University of Calgary, SAVI's launched the First Line app, an efficient on-farm application so that veterinarians have ready access to the guidelines. The SAVI team has worked closely with the veterinary colleges in Ontario and Quebec to make the First Line app accessible to all veterinary students as well, our new generation of animal health experts. The CVMA hopes to secure new funding to build on the significant accomplishments under SAVI and further improve decision support for veterinarians on prudent antimicrobial use in animals. Veterinarians in private practice, industry, and government play an integral role in early detection and management of foreign animal diseases and zoonotic diseases, and in helping ensure food safety and security for all Canadians, and work closely with livestock producers to promote and maintain biosecurity on thousands of farms from coast to coast. Further to this, CVMA is pleased to have collaborated on many projects and continues to participate in committees and advisory groups with colleagues in the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, the Public Health Agency of Canada, Health Canada, and as previously mentioned, the AAFC. To cite one example, the CVMA has been actively involved with the CFIA over a number of years in communicating guidance for practicing veterinarians for disease threats such as African swine fever, which we've discussed to some extent already, and avian influenza, which I think everyone is aware is a significant and current problem. In order to continue to provide these valuable services to veterinarians and to protect Canadians and our animal industries, we must ensure that there is a robust veterinary workforce to meet these demands. Unfortunately, the profession in Canada and most other countries is facing a workforce shortage that has been exacerbated by the recent pandemic. The number of veterinary professionals leaving the workforce, either through retirement or as the result of burnout, currently outpaces the number of graduates from our 5 national veterinary schools. We applaud the work of several of our provincial counterparts in securing funding to help increase the seat count for training new veterinarians in Canada. And we hope to work more closely and in addition with the federal government to secure additional funding, including for infrastructure, to continue this trend of growing and training more veterinarians here at home. We also look forward to our continuing partnership with Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada to help Canadian employers navigate the immigration process to obtain foreign-trained veterinarians and perhaps simplify and accelerate the process to allow these much-needed, highly trained professionals to enter the Canadian workforce as expeditiously as possible. I would be remiss not to mention the toll the increased workload has had on the veterinary team. The stresses veterinary professionals face are many, and the added burden of significantly longer days without respite has impacted the mental health and well-being of many of our colleagues. We have increased our attention and resources to this very important area, but there is ever more to be done. Thank you again for allowing the Canadian Veterinary Medical Association the opportunity to speak tonight. I look forward to your questions and further discussion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lawson. We'll now turn to UPA.
Now on to the UPA. Mr. Doyon or Mr. Charron, you have 5 minutes. Mr. Chair, thank you very much. My name is Paul Doyon. I'm the Senior Vice President General at the Union des Producteurs Agricoles. I'm a dairy and maple syrup producer and a dairy farmer. With me is Guylain Charron, advisor to our Agricultural Research and Policy Department. Animal biosecurity is an important issue both for the health and well-being of animals, and because of the major economic and commercial consequences associated with animal diseases. According to the Équipe québécoise de contrôle des maladies avicoles, avian influenza outbreaks in 2022 and 2023 cost the Canadian government more than $180 million, with losses of 7.6 million birds to date. The Équipe québécoise de santé porcine, a team that focuses on pork health, informed us of a recent study by the University of Iowa, which estimated the impact of an outbreak of African swine fever at $7.5 billion per year, and of a combined outbreak of African swine fever and foot and mouth disease at $23 billion per year for the swine and cattle sectors in the United States. Biosecurity measures are therefore essential to protect against disease outbreaks throughout the production chain, from producer to consumer. This means that agricultural input suppliers, livestock transporters, slaughterhouses, processors, and renderers all have a role to play in animal biosecurity. The various livestock sectors have developed tools containing biosecurity measures that they apply to protect animal health. Many of these measures are based on the national standards and biosafety principles of the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, or CFIA. The codes of practice for the care and handling of farm animals developed by the National Farm Animal Care Council are also used by our affiliated groups and include on-farm biosecurity requirements and recommendations, or refer to CFIA national standards. For example, the beef and dairy sectors are working together to develop a biosecurity strategy for the entire beef industry. Their objective is to develop and implement a biosecurity action plan involving all players in the industry. They also have a certification program containing biosecurity criteria for farms. Poultry sector groups have mandatory biosecurity requirements in their respective health and safety programs. They apply biosafety protocols and an emergency plan developed by the EQCMA. The Éleveurs de Port du Québec have biosafety training materials and an emergency measures plan to prepare for a case of African swine fever. They also are collaborating on a project led by the Centre de Développement du Port du Québec to improve biosecurity and swine transportation. Traceability is an important tool that is complementary to animal biosecurity. In the event of an animal disease outbreak, it helps reduce response time and mitigate economic, environmental, and social impacts. In Quebec, traceability is mandatory for cattle, bison, cervids, sheep, and pigs. The current consultation on the health of animals regulations aims to improve the current traceability rules by correcting a number of deficiencies, including the additions of goats, the reduction of the time required to communicate information, the requirement to obtain a site identification number, and the requirement to report movements from the facility of departure or the departure facility to the destination facility. The World Organization for Animal Health made an assessment of Canada's veterinary services in March 2017. This highlighted the collaborative work between the UPA, the CFIA, and the Quebec Agriculture Department, the Ministère de l'Agriculture du Québec. The report notes the effectiveness of our communications, particularly those of our producer associations, which are very active in communicating messages relating to animal health and the promotion of biosecurity. To optimize animal biosecurity, the government must offer the necessary support to the agricultural sector, in particular by improving scientific support and funding for initiatives by sectors to adopt a biosecurity and herd health strategy by including the cost of cleaning and disinfection in the emergency costs covered by the CFIA as recommended by the World Organization for Animal Health report, by facilitating vaccine development and access to vaccination programs and protocols for sectors wishing to use this approach, and by tightening biosecurity controls at the borders, for example, by increasing fines for violators. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Doyen.
Thank you, Mr. Doyon.
Questions? Colleagues, I am going to ask for the first round, we're going to do 5 minutes. The second round, I would ask the major parties if you could be in and around 4. I'll give some discretion into the NDP block if you could ask a 1-minute question and 1-minute response. We're a little bit pressed for time. We've got a lot of work and it's been a long night. So, Mr. Barlow, am I going to start with you or Mr. Steinley? Over to you for 5 minutes, my friend.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our presenters this evening. How has recent regulatory changes, such as the transport regulation or Transport Canada's electronic logging device mandate, affected animal health and biosecurity? And I asked Mr. Bowman this question because I think there has been lots of reports of animal transportation being much more strenuous on the animal now because of the ELDs, as they're known in the business. And I'd just like to get some comments on that and how maybe this wasn't quite thought out when it came to the idea of transporting animals, because across the country there aren't that many places where you can unload animals safely. I grew up on a farm, so I know that the most stress animals go through is when they're being loaded and unloaded. So just get some comments on the record, and if you've had any conversations with the minister about ELDs and if she's talked to the transport minister.
So I will answer the last part first, and yes, the minister is well aware, as well as the Minister of Transport is well aware of our concerns on how we've been dealing with this, and I talked about the unintended consequences of the shorter or of the the ELDs, and how it affect the time. Basically the time of the cattle time in transport does not line up with the trucker driver time, and that's where the conflict arises, and how we mitigate that problem, that's our concern right now.
So I think that's where it falls into one of those ideas where it might have been good in theory, but in practicality and the distance that the animals have to be transported, is that where the biggest issue lies in? Would I be correct in saying that?
I would say that, and part of it comes from the idea of we're looking to the model of Europe for some of the basis of the regulations to begin with, and you can cover a lot of Europe by the time you get from here to Thunder Bay. So
would I be right in saying that the industry, the business, and your 60,000 beef producers would think we should be more in line with the American transportation regulations than Europe?
we would like to think that they are our major competitor, and we export a lot of livestock into the United States, and so to align our transport regulations with them, that would go a long way to help where we're at. Ali, did you want to add anything to that?
Sure. Thank you very much for your question, Mr. Steinley. We have two concerns. One of the main concerns with the humane transportation regs is the shortened duration that livestock can be transported. And the concern being that there's no scientific evidence that it improves the welfare of the cattle to have this shortened duration. It sounds good in theory, but we can't scientifically show any evidence that it's improving it. Unfortunately, what we can show is that the rest stops, we have cattle commingled that otherwise wouldn't have contact with each other, which is creating a theoretical and a real biosecurity risk. The theoretical risk would arise with an emergency like a foot and mouth disease. We'd have more animals in contact with each other. The real risk is we actually can show an increase in endemic pathogens in those animals that have been through the commingled sites. So that's our primary concern with the humane transport. And I can speak to the ELDs if there's time.
I do have another quick question when it comes to FMD. Lee, and don't worry, I didn't forget about you. I was getting there. So you mentioned the upcoming traceability regulations. Could you elaborate on how you expect they could affect Canada's FMD preparedness?
Certainly. The beef industry is strongly supportive of the concept of increased traceability. It's an important pillar in our prevention, along with surveillance and biosecurity for preparing for foreign animal disease. We do have concerns about the feasibility of implementation in the field right now with the available technology. And we also have some substantial concerns with the relative cost benefit for what it's going to cost to implement these regulations. But overall, we're supportive of the approach, and we're appreciative of the CFI's sticking with the cattle implementation plan, which was an industry design plan.
Lee, one more quick question for you. I got to keep it tight. If the provinces are a little bit slower to uptake on the vaccine bank, have you got confirmation from the minister and CFIA that they're going to go ahead with that vaccine bank with or without the provinces?
I think we have confidence that an aspect of the vaccine bank will go ahead. They're always looking for provincial engagement, but there's lots of room in different aspects of emergency preparedness for that to happen.
Thank you very much. We'll now turn to Ms. Taylor-Roy. Thank you, Ms. Rosengren, and thank you, Mr. Steinley. Ms. Taylor-Roy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here this evening. I'm going to be sharing my time with Ms. Valdez, who's virtual, but I'd like to start with my questions for Mr. Lawson. One of the questions that I'm curious about is the increasing occurrence of zoonotic diseases and any correlation you see to extreme climate events, because there's been a lot of talk about that, and I'm just wondering, a lot of, in your website, you advocate for all medical professionals to work together in the spirit of one health for people and animals. And I'm just wondering if you can elaborate a little bit on this and any thoughts you have around how that is intersecting and how it might affect biosecurity preparedness.
Yes, that's a great question. So I think, as we know, as an impact of climate change, weather patterns are different now than they have been in even the recent past. One of the things we're noticing in many jurisdictions is storms that are larger, cover larger swaths, and as such can move endemic diseases much easier. We should all be aware, obviously, coming out of a pandemic, the reality is that diseases know no borders, and we're certainly seeing an impact here in Canada with avian influenza being something that no longer has a seasonal reality to it, at least in the last few years, and that is consistent with what we're seeing in North America and in Europe. So I think there is a connection there, one that veterinarians are very much determined to be part of the solution. A number of the veterinary colleges have began to develop and institute programs which are focused on One Health, and a very collaborative approach with human healthcare professionals, and that is something that we very much see as the path going forward in the future.
Great, and thank you. Just one more quick question before I turn it over to Ms. Valdez. But I was wondering, you talked about the antimicrobial use guidelines, and I'm wondering how the increased use of antibiotics in agriculture, especially in livestock, has affected the ability to actually fight some of the diseases that you're seeing. I was wondering if you could comment on that.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. What we are concerned about is the loss of effectiveness with antimicrobial resistance over time, and that's a phenomenon that we see in the veterinary world as well as in the human world. What we have seen in the last number of years is significant fewer options available within the Canadian landscape for medications, essential medications to treat livestock. So that's a challenge in its own, and I think there's been a few others here this evening that have touched on that. The ultimate goal with this technology and with having this app at the fingertips of veterinary care providers is that we can make the most prudent and up-to-date decisions on which antimicrobials to use for given conditions. Obviously, technology becomes that real benefit in even a very rural setting in food animal production, where the most up-to-date version of the app would be available, and hopefully allow our members and veterinarians across Canada to make the best decisions possible to reduce the risk of antimicrobial resistance over time.
Thank you very much, and I'll pass it over to Ms. Valdez.
Ms. Valdez, you have 90 seconds.
Thank you, Leah and Mr. Chair. So, Dr. Trevor Lawson, back to you for my last question. Congrats on your app launch, by the way. Again, you described microbials in your opening and the lack of labor availability for veterinarians. What other recommendations can you provide the committee to increase the veterinarian labor shortage that we have?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. So the two areas that we're most focused on in the short to medium term, are through the immigration pathways to try to have employers in Canada gain access to appropriately qualified international candidates. So we've been working with Refugee and Citizenship Canada to help do that. The other thing we've been doing is we've been advocating with our provincial partners to the provinces to increase funding to veterinary school seats. Obviously, that's not an immediate fix. That will take time because it takes time to increase the seat count and turn out new, young, capable veterinarians to provide the service. Those would be two of the priority pathways, but we've often likened it to if we don't plug the hole in the bucket, so to speak, find ways to retain the veterinarians that we currently have in practice, to have their careers be more fulfilling and have them stay in the practice of veterinary medicine longer, then it becomes a very challenging situation. So we've also been very focused on working with some researchers at OVC in Ontario, trying to determine what best practices, best workplaces look like, to be able to offer our members a better opportunity for career fulfillment and hopefully long and satisfying and valued careers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much to you both. Maintenant, Monsieur Perron.
Mr. Perron now. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and to the witnesses for being here tonight. I'll try to be brief. Mr. Bowman, you said earlier that you were happy that in the 2023 budget there would be a creation of a vaccine bank for FMD. Have you heard of any developments? Sometimes we announce things, but it takes a little while before we actually implement them. Have you heard anything from the government that this was in development?
We'll defer that question to Dr. Rosengren to clarify.
Thank you very much. So we know that the CFIA is actively working on establishing the vaccine bank and looking at the realities. I myself am actually involved in a working group that is looking at the logistics of the deployment of the vaccine. So there's many aspects that need to be addressed before we have the vaccine working or the vaccine bank fully established. The other good news is it was announced when we were in Paris last week at the WOA meetings that they've reaffirmed their vaccine sharing arrangement with the United States, New Zealand, Australia, and the United Kingdom. So our increased bank will give us a stronger footing in that sharing arrangement, but it also secures
Merci beaucoup. Désolé de vous interrompre.
Sorry to cut you off. Our time is really short. Mr. Doyon, you talked about investing in prevention and in traceability. Mr. Roy earlier asked us and insisted on permanent funding that would have nothing to do with the political cycle and would allow the industry to be properly prepared with a traceability system that would be efficient and quick. Do you think that that is a good idea? And would you make a recommendation of it as well? Absolutely. What Mr. Roy said earlier is exactly what we think as well.
Sur le zonage et la...
With regards to zoning and compartmentalization that Mr. Bertinotti spoke about earlier, if there's an infection, do you think that it's a good idea? Do you think it's realistic to be able to negotiate with American partners? Of course, that is part of our negotiations with neighboring countries, but for other reasons which are just as important, I'm sure that there is always the possibility of arriving at an agreement. Mr. Fréchet talked about the difficulty of managing physical paper as documentation. I'm sure that you agree with that. Do you agree? And do you think it's a good idea to develop an app? And if you have a recommendation to make to the committee to be better prepared towards to deal with diseases, I might let Mr. Charon answer, but yes, what was said earlier is we agree with that, and indeed we are in a digital age, and so dealing with papers, actual physical paper, is a bit complicated and can lead to mistakes, but I'll let Mr. Charon answer for the rest. In order to improve animal health, our pork industry partners talked about investments earlier. We also talked about predictability. We talked about having other sectors join us as well. So I think that that is something that we should focus on. And of course, it is always important to continue to work with the industry and the government to better understand what everyone is going through. Have you no other more specific recommendations to make? For the time being, it would be these specific sectors are working on those things. We are here to support them. Thank you, Mr. Doyon. Mr. Bowman, I know that you talked about verified beef production. How could that help? Also, we have heard many times in this committee that beef producers want to remove the standard for BSE in order to improve your production. Of course, we're hearing about a bunch of other diseases. I'd like to hear you on that. Of course, with regards to biosecurity, there are all of the agreements with other countries, and we have to ensure that our country retains its biosecurity through these commercial agreements. That's always a little bit complicated. As I said earlier, when it's a health issue, we should go above and beyond certain commercial parameters to bring all of our efforts together, to pool our efforts together. Thank you, Mr. Perron. Now, Mr. Johns, for 5 minutes.
Much. Thank you to our witnesses for your important testimony. And I'm just going to go back to May 3rd in 2023, the testimony to the committee by Dr. Mary Jane Ireland, Canada's Chief Veterinarian Officer. She explained that veterinarians play an important role in ensuring animal, environmental, and human health. And I think about actually one of the most important people in my life was my late uncle, Larry Bryant, who was a veterinarian He worked in Spruce View just outside of Red Deer and Nobleford just outside of Lethbridge. And just the tireless amount of hours he put in and the compassion and care that he brought to his field and to the animals and especially to the farmers. Just always being there. And he graduated back in 1952 from UBC and then later went to Guelph, to finish up his doctorate. And it just gives me a chance also to thank all veterinarians for the important work they do and the sacrifice they make here in Canada. I think we owe them a ton of gratitude. So again, it is 4 years at the end of June for my Uncle Larry, so it's nice to be able to honor him, that we've lost him. So my late uncle was just an incredible pillar in our family and really showed us compassion and thoughtfulness. So I'm going to go to you, Mr. Lawson. Dr. Ireland also noted that Canada, like many countries, is experiencing a shortage of veterinarians, both in private practice and in public health units. In its 2020 report on this subject, the Canadian Veterinarian Medical Association recommends annual growth of 3.5% to 4% in veterinarians. In your opinion, can you talk about the causes of this shortage? And I know you've started down this thread, but I want to continue this conversation and pose some questions to you.
Certainly, I'd be happy to. I think it's very multifactorial. Without question, if we think back over the last 25 years, we've had population expansion, economic expansion in Canada. However, our veterinary colleges have been essentially at the status quo in terms of the number of seats that we're graduating on an annual basis. As a result, we've not really been able to be ahead of the curve in terms of kind of meeting the new demand. We had done the workforce study in 2020, which showed that there was a structural deficit in what we were going to be graduating for new graduate veterinarians. What we didn't account for at that time, obviously, was a global pandemic, and it clearly has exacerbated the situation. So what we are seeing now, where we're turning out, the same amount of new graduate veterinarians, we're just treading water or losing ground on an annual basis. So this becomes a real challenge. It creates workplaces for veterinarians, whether they're in small rural practices, serving food animal production, or in companion animal or any sector. It's much more challenging, I think, to find the career as rewarding as it once was, as you described from your uncle. And that certainly is something that hits home for myself. So I think, that in the big picture, we understand the structural deficit exists. It's going to exist over the course of the next 10 years. At a minimum, but we do have an opportunity to take steps to increase funding to vet colleges, to increase the number of seats that are homegrown Canadian veterinarians. We have an opportunity to discuss, admissions requirements for vet schools, how we serve all of society in a better way. So the companion animal sector, but also the food animal sector, which is something that is near and dear to my heart. And it's something that touches close to home because I understand how very stretched thin the rural regions in Canada are and have been for some time. And I think, Dr. Rosengren could certainly speak to that as well, because that's not a new phenomenon. It's something we've been very aware of for the last 25 years.
The need to remove barriers. I mean, we obviously we pushed hard as New Democrats to freeze, stop the interest on student loans and certainly to increase grants to people that are studying. I know that's important, but given the veterinarian training and accreditation are provincial competencies, can you speak about the role the federal government can play in addressing this shortage in addition to what I just mentioned?
I think one of the pathways that we've been exploring most closely, we've developed a partnership with Immigration, Refugee, and Citizenship Canada to try to remove any potential barriers. It is very important that the eligible candidates find a pathway that can most easily bring them to Canada if they choose to be here. So that is going to be an ongoing, I think, work stream for us over the next year or so, and we'll continue to have dialogue. I think we've made good progress in that regard. Hiring internationally, I think, is quite a challenge for just about any company or any business. Veterinary medicine has the added layer of this being a regulated profession that comes with very high standards. So we have to be aware of that. But there are ways that I think we can work through that.
We'll leave it at that, gentlemen. Thank you. Monsieur Lehoux, 4 minutes.
Mr. Lehoux, 4 minutes, please. Thank you. Mr. Doyon, my question is for you. You spoke earlier about how to handle animals. We know that more we handle them, the longer the distances, more they're likely to contract certain diseases. We know that slaughterhouses in Quebec are further and further and have greater distances between them and farms. And now there are some closures that are going to come up in Quebec. Do you have a recommendation on that, Mr. Doyon? Should we work differently with regards to how we handle animals? We should turn to specialists who are experts on animal health. The model that we need to choose is the one that is the less risky. Earlier, people were talking about offloading the animals in areas that might be contaminated. If it's preferable to transport them for a longer amount of time, then we should do that. But if it's possible to make breaks, to bring them to certain areas, well, the experts should choose the best method. The recommendation I'd like to hear is the following. Of course, indeed, we should ask specialists, but there is a very important question to answer. We have to be careful, because is this really the best way of proceeding with the goal that we have in mind? Thank you very much. Mr. Barlow?
Thank you, Mr. Lehoux. And Gord, I'm glad that your uncle was a veterinarian. I think he would be very supportive of C-75, 275, not having the public go on protesting on farms to protect our biosecurity.
Mr. Barlow, I'll stop the clock. There was an issue with your microphone. It wasn't on. I don't know why, but it is now. There you
How
go.
are we now? Good? Okay. So to Mr. Bowman, we heard from, or Lee for that matter, we heard from CFIA last week when they were talking about avian influenza that CFIA is not prepared to handle multiple outbreaks of an animal-borne virus at the same time, whether that's avian flu, say foot and mouth were to happen, or African swine fever. What is your opinion on that and the preparedness of CFIA to let alone handle one pandemic, let alone two viruses, or two outbreaks were to happen at the same time?
Back at our annual meeting, we had a representative from CFIA present to us, and they said that dealing with avian influenza had been all that they wanted to handle at that point in time. And if there was another outbreak that was to happen, they would be under duress trying to cover all the basis of another outbreak.
Now, to go from CFIA to CBSA, what more can Border Services do to understand the urgency and be more prepared for, again, an outbreak or the spread of an animal-borne virus?
Would be zero tolerance, which they're at that now, but they need to be, the fines need to be more forceful. I look to Australia where, it's nothing to have a $100,000 fine for having some sausage in your suitcase. And you get a few of those fines out there, and that certainly deters people from thinking that they could sneak some stuff in. So I think to maintain the zero tolerance policy and have some severe penalties for breaking the law, that's where they need to be.
Thank you, Mr. Barlow. Thank you, Mr. Bowman. We'll now turn to Ms. Khalid for up to 4 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for your presentations. Dr. Lawson, perhaps I'll just continue with the line of questioning that my colleagues have asked you. Now, I don't think the challenge is bringing or attracting veterinarians into Canada. I think the challenge is, are they going to be able to find jobs here with the strict regulations to get their licenses? So perhaps I'll ask you, sir, how's your association willing to work to ensure that people that are indeed coming to Canada to pursue these opportunities are actually going to be able to get their license and practice?
Thank you for the question. So CVMA, through the National Examining Board, which is an arm's length organization that oversees licensing of veterinarians in Canada, has been very active in this regard, and we've worked very closely with testing sites at the Western College of Veterinary Medicine, who does all of the in-clinic testing for graduates who are from abroad. What we know from speaking with them is that on paper, there may look at times like there's a backlog, but when there's a call to take the exam, not all candidates will reply in the positive. So there are systems in place. Those systems appear to be working well, and often what's happening is they're finding when they call for testing that there's not enough candidates to put the testing on because it takes a certain group to do it at a time. We've also started to explore more closely, and we have a consultant working on this at this point in time that we've co-funded this year with the registrar group in Canada that oversees licensing in the provinces, a pathway to limited licensure. So that is something that we're going to continue to work on. That'll be coming forward over the course of throughout 2023, and that is something that should hopefully be something that allows someone with specific skill sets. For example, if you were a cattle practitioner in a different country and wanted to come to Canada, what it should allow us to do then is to be able to say, do they have the skill set to work with cattle? And can we license them here for that in a limited way? So that we're not asking them to do something that they've not done in 20 years, for example, work with cats or work with horses. So we're exploring those opportunities. I think that they show good potential, and we're certainly committed to work in that regard.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lawson. I look forward to seeing how that plays out. Mr. Bowman and Monsieur Doyon, perhaps I'll ask you. I grew up in England during the mad cow epidemic in 98. In Canada, it was detected in 2003. Now, in these past 20 years, how has the industry changed to detect, to protect with BSE, and how are the regulations impacting the industry?
First of all, there was the feed ban, so we weren't when the outbreak occurred, we were no longer allowed to feed animal byproducts back to ruminants. So that was the first stage, and then since then there was different regulations in the slaughtering facilities that changed the amount of material that could be used and what had. So they were just being extra cautious on what they could use and couldn't use. Dr. Lee, did you want to elaborate a little bit more on the technical side?
Certainly, Matt touched on the feed ban, but also the specified risk material is what he's referring to in the slaughterhouses, and that's what we're working right now for harmonization with the United States. We've had a very effective system. The prevalence of BSE globally is virtually zero, and so we're looking for a balanced approach that mitigates any potential of human risk while ensuring competitiveness and effectiveness in our production system.
That brings us to time. Thank you so much. We'll now go to Monsieur Parent. Environ 2 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
About 2 minutes, Mr. Perron. Thank you very much. Mr. Bowman, I'll pick up where I left off. I'd like you to tell us more about the Verified Beef program. Can you tell us more about that and how it can help prevent disease invasion?
Part of the Verified Beef program is a producer training program. There are modules in there that deal specifically with biosecurity. So they develop and teach best practices for biosecurity. And at this point, the majority of producers and the majority of the production in Canada has been trained on these practices. So if we're going to slow the spread of a disease down, the producers are trained on what they need to do to slow this down or stop the spread of a disease at this point in time.
Merci beaucoup. Et qu'en est-il?
Thank you. And what about the norms for BSE, which you just spoke about with Ms. Khalid? You still recommend that, given the negligible risk in Canada, that we go back to the previous norms? Do you think that we can find an agreement with the United States that would be more uniform?
We'll never get back to where we were. But I think we're in a better place than we were as far as controlling the disease if there was another outbreak. And I think moving towards harmonized regulations with our trading partners is where we'll end up. The point right now is we want to make sure that our trading partners will accept any changes that we make to the regulations that we want to propose. There's no point changing the regulations if our trading partners aren't going to accept the changes that we make. So we want to make sure that they're acceptable, and if we can harmonize with the United States, that makes the trade across the border a whole lot easier if everything's the same.
Parfait, Monsieur Bowman, Monsieur Perron.
Thank you, Mr. Bowen and Mr. Perron. And to end, Mr. Johns for 2 minutes.
Again, to all the witnesses for the important testimony. Mr. Bowman, in terms of Animal Health Canada, it's a new organization. Can you tell us how you see it addressing gaps in our current preparedness? And you got about 2 minutes to answer and maybe add anything you weren't able to speak to today here at committee.
I will defer that to Dr. Rosengren.
I'm so glad you ended the committee on that positive note. We are very excited to be working with Animal Health Canada. CCA is a strong supporting partner, and we see this, it was raised earlier, whether CFIA had the capacity to deal with multiple outbreaks or large national outbreaks. It's going to be through the collaboration at Animal Health Canada table with the federal government, the provincial governments, and all of the commodities that we're going to solve these very challenging problems. We're looking forward to the establishment of a new emergency management division where most of this work will take place. Thank you.
Speak a little bit more, some of your hopes in terms of addressing the gaps, like maybe a little bit more about where you're hoping you'll see some of that.
So from a beef specific point, certainly we need more preparedness plans and response plans for foot and mouth disease. We need to look at our biosecurity protocols and see where there's gaps, do the science, and then do the training and the extension through industry. Dr. Lawson mentioned antimicrobial use and resistance. That falls under the purview of Animal Health Canada, and it has a One Health banner. So it really looks at all of these issues. We had climate change raised today. That would fall under Animal Health Canada. The mental health and welfare of producers. There's so many aspects that we can collaborate together and really find strong solutions through this new organization.
Thank you very much to you both. Just quickly, Mr. Steinle raised the prospect of the ELDs, the electronic logging devices. I wanted to ask you, Dr. Rosengren, or Mr. Bowman, because I've been working with the national cattle feeders to try to engage with the Ministry of Transport on this, and there seems to be the goal from the cattle feeders to provide additional guidance or perhaps a policy statement that adverse conditions or security of the load would include situations where animal welfare is at risk. In some of the conversations with officials at Transport, they seem to suggest that there's enough regulatory provision in that right now. Do you have any comment? You talked about the health of animal transport regulations writ large, and that's well heard. But on the ELD specifically, does CCA have a position?
We do. Our position is exactly as you said, National Cattle Feeders has. What we need is the enforcement, which occurs at the provincial level, to be well understood that animal welfare would fall under the guidance that allows drivers to make decisions in an emergency situation. We're not asking for an exemption under normal loads, but in situations where the health or the welfare of the animals is impaired by following the hours of service regulation, we are asking that provincial enforcement is well aware that that is the guidance of Transport Canada.
And just quickly, has that been a message that's been heeded thus far, or there's still some more work to be done there to make sure that that position is being articulated?
We continue to repeat it to anybody who will listen.
Thank you very much. Look, on behalf of all the witnesses, on behalf of all the committee, I'd like to thank all our witnesses for taking the time this evening for your collective work in agriculture and for helping to inform our study. So we're going to release you and enjoy your Monday night. Now, colleagues, unfortunately, we have just a little bit more work to do. We're going to go in camera, so please, for those who are online, the quicker you can get in, the quicker we can get this done. We've been delayed, and I won't keep you any longer than I have to. But thank you to the witnesses, and we will adjourn our public meeting, and we'll see you in our private meeting.